conference that is brought together by organizers, artists, activists, and it's been an effort, a community effort. And we are happy to ask City College to be just one of the many colleges that are hosting these very important conversations. So welcome to all of you, and without further ado, I just wanted to pass the mic to our panel and take it away from here. So really happy that you all could join us and tell us a little bit more about the work and organizing that you all do here in San Diego and beyond. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're going to be talking a little bit about our path to abolitionist politics through reflections in the collective work we do with Detention Resistance here locally in San Diego. First, we're going to start off with introductions. I'm Alexis Meza, and my pronouns are she, her. And my roles in DR, I've played many roles in DR, which is what we refer to Detention Resistance as. I started off doing post-release work. I've also done a lot of coalitional work. I do a lot of presentations now and fundraising around that. And also working to build an archive of testimonies with folks who were detained during COVID-19 at Otay Mesa Detention Center. And I also am a co-founder of the Medical Advocacy Summer Fellowship, where we work with medical professionals and students in training to do medical advocacy for folks who are detained.
Hi everyone, my name is Angel. I use they them pronouns. And I guess like what I've been involved with DRN has been, first when I joined more than a year ago, it was in post-release because we have like a little hosting network where we host people recently released from detention. So that's where I've been supporting the most, and more recently doing work in FunCom, making graphics, stuff. Where is that?
Yeah.
Can y'all hear me well? Okay, good. So where was I? Yeah, doing FunCom work, and then also with Alexis at the Medical Advocacy Fellowship. And yeah.
Everybody, my name is Emmet Norris. I use he, him pronouns, and I mainly work also in post-release. And I actually came to DR as a
El sonido del mic se fue.
Okay, thanks. Technology is on. Go ahead.
So the Zoom now. You don't need to be on. Oh, is it on now? Yeah. Hi again. My name is Emmet Norris. I use he, him pronouns, and I first came to working with DR as a sponsor for an asylum seeker. And in the beginning, being new in San Diego, both of us needed a lot of support, needed a community, and so I first came to DR really looking for finding that community and finding a place to find food and shelter for both of us. So after we became more stabilized, we found out that we had capacity to actually be a part of this network. So being part of post-release for me has been kind of the full circle process of seeing what our capacity is and then what it means to be part of a network that was supportive to me, and how do we kind of continue that work. So good to be here, excited to talk to you all. And and here's Jess.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry I'm not joining in person. I'm sick, as you can hear in my voice. My name is Jess Whatcott. I use they them pronouns. I am currently part of the finance committee at Detention Resistance, so I help to coordinate all the donations that come in and sending them to most of it goes to directly support compas. And then I also do monthly letter writing. It's at Centro Cultural de la Raza in Balboa Park the last Sunday of the month from 12 to 2, if anyone ever wants to come. We write letters to people inside of OMDC. This has been a way to connect with people while visitation has been stopped for most of COVID. It's just getting started again. But I think we're going to continue doing the letter writing because it's another way to connect with people.
One, two, check. Check. Okay, I'll go ahead and get started in the interest of time. I'll start off first with acknowledging that we are on the unceded traditional lands of the Kumeyaay people, and we want to make that land acknowledgement, and also that I don't think they can hear. Also that their territory was bisected by the imposition of what we call today the US-Mexico border. They've been subjected to surveillance and policing by the Customs US Border Patrol, immigration enforcement agencies. And I think it's important for us to go back to that history for us to kind of ground the politics of detention resistance and the ways that we see the US-Mexico border as an illegitimate border, and the ways that those mechanisms of surveillance and policing were imposed upon them, but then were also used against other populations, racialized populations in particular, populations that are seen as other in the US, populations like the Mexican population, Asian communities, today Haitian migrants, and Central Americans, right? We can extend that analysis, but it's all to say that we acknowledge that this border and immigration and asylum policies are racialized, and they're particularly targeting and oppressing certain communities. So today, this is what we'll be doing. I'll actually just be doing a really brief kind of history of detention resistance and our guiding principles, and then I'll be transitioning into taking a moderator role for this panel. So we'll start off with that history and guiding principles. Then Emmet will be talking a little bit about our structure and the praxis. Jess will join us and talk about the shutdown Otay Mesa Detention Center, but more generally about the actual facility that we work with the intention to shut down. Then Angel will join us to talk about process in DR and coalition building. And then we'll open it up, hopefully with some time for dialogue around the topic of abolition and reform and questions in question section. So who we are, a brief introduction. We are a collective that has been doing work with folks who are detained at Otay Mesa Detention Center for the last 4 years. Detention Resistance was formed in 2018 when there was the first announcement. Many of you might remember the mass exodus in Central America, what was referred to as the migrant caravans. It was all over the news, it was all over the media, it got a lot of national attention. So around that time period when the original, when one of the first caravans of that year occurred, Pueblos Sin Fronteras was organizing with and accompanying these caravans to the border. Once they arrived to the border, they made a call out for local support in San Diego to support people as they were able to cross and seek asylum in the US. So Detention Resistance was originally called Otay Mesa Detention Resistance, and it was a subcommittee of Pueblos Sin Fronteras. Eventually, it broke off and became its own collective, and that occurred in 2018. Some of its first projects were a big donation drive that raised a lot of money because we were receiving a lot of support from far, from close and far, in response to supporting the folks who were part of the caravans and transporting a lot of donations from the Centro Cultural de la Raza to Tijuana shelters and the different areas and sites that people were staying in, including the encampments. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the history, just really briefly. We are, in terms of our kind of the ways we present ourselves in our politics, an abolitionist, non-institutional, non-hierarchical, autonomous collective. And we say that we are organizing in accompaniment with migrants and refugees. We're going to get into those words a little bit. So very briefly, our mission, if we were to make it brief, is to end detention and make visible the human rights abuses at the migrant prisons, with a focus in closing Otay Mesa Detention Center. We work in accompaniment with those most impacted to abolish carceral logics and displace systems of domination. We are driven to create another world, one based on nurturing and cultivating alternative ways of relating to one another within networks of community support. Each of our panelists today will expand a little bit on different aspects of this mission that we're sharing here. So abolition, we learn about abolition from many people. What we quote here, for example, really briefly, Ruthie Wilson-Gilmore's description of abolition as a movement to end systemic violence, including interpersonal vulnerabilities and displacements that keep the system going. In other words, the goal is to change how we interact with each other and the planet by putting people before profits, welfare before warfare, and life over death. So with that said, I wanted to make sure to talk about kind of what's important to us in terms of the original intentions in the founding of Detention Resistance. With this definition here of abolition, some really important aspects of the collective in its original intention and what we try to strive for today is relationship building. It's, as this talks about, right, talking about our relationship to each other. So while we are in this larger struggle and one very focused on closing Otay Mesa Detention Center, part of abolitionist politics is also the types of relationships we build with fellow collective members, right? With those people that we work with in conjunction with other orgs as well. And people will also get into that a little bit more, but I do want to point out that we see this struggle as wider than just, the political work to shut that down. We see this all as interconnected. So guided by abolitionism, Detention Resistance imagines and works to build a world without cages, borders, and policing. We practice abolition by both undoing these structures and logics of oppression, and by creating a new world, one based on mutual aid, community care, self-determination, and transformative justice. This sentence or so here is just intended to say that a lot of the times when people talk about abolition, it's about dismantling, it's about undoing, it's about tearing down, right, ending certain systems. But in our work, in conjunction with that, we do want to close down this facility. We do want to undo these oppressions and forms of domination. But while we do that, we also want to be active in creating the world that we want to see, right? So that's part of what we were talking about with the relationship building. So we want to make sure that as we dismantle, we are also creative. So a little more on abolition. We are guided by the principles of the Zapatistas, an indigenous-led movement that rose up against neoliberalism and other forms of globalization in 1994 in Chiapas, in southern Mexico. And so I have a quote here, it's covered, but it says, caminar preguntando. It means to ask questions as we walk. So it's all to say that we're not here to teach you what abolitionism is or isn't. We're here to share some reflections and the ways in which we hope and see ourselves working toward a politics, right? So very simply, we are very critical of reform, and we will open up that kind of conversation later in the presentation. One of the very basic reasons why is because reforms in essence propose to better the conditions, usually as stated in certain standards, right, or policies. And they are never about actually ending these practices or closing these facilities. Given the rampant abuse that we hear about every single day at Otay Mesa Detention Center, the medical negligence and the preventable deaths that we've heard about and people we've known, people we spoke to and worked with, we do not believe that these facilities are necessary or can be reformed. So we do support, however, non-reformist reforms, which we can get into more later if someone would like to talk on that. But in kind of brief, it means reforms that don't kind of extend the life of these facilities or oppressions, that don't create additional barriers or obstacles in our ultimate goal. Thank you. Okay. So there's a few things about the ways in which we think about the concept of accompaniment. We use this word a lot when we talk about what kind of work we do, right? We say we at least try to work in accompaniment with folks who are detained. And what we mean by that is that we do not want to be saviors. We are against the savior complex, right? We are not here to help people who are migrated or detained. So we differ from these concepts that we're bringing charity or that we're, it would take a long conversation to get into, but in the allyship and solidarity, we see this as joint struggle, meaning that while we are facing different oppressions under the system, they are complementary, and the aspects that we are affected by are part of the same system. That does not mean that we are erasing or don't acknowledge difference. We see it as we are all affected differently, and we need to accompany each other in this struggle, which hopefully is ultimately a similar kind of end goal here, that is autonomy. We organize across difference, acknowledging how each axis of power operates in relationship to one another. So we see, right, how this larger system that we're looking at of settler colonial racial capitalism is impacting the detention center, the people who are detained, but also that we're not outside of the system. We're not living outside of it. We are all within it and somehow likely affected by it or impacted by it. We accompany one another hand in hand in our respective and shared struggles with those willing to walk the road to autonomy. Accompaniment, like I mentioned earlier, is inspired by the Zapatista praxis and recognizes the thousands of migrants and refugees who have made their journey in accompaniment as families in caravans crossing various countries to reach the border region. We believe that these people who are migrating, people who are seeking asylum, have the right to migrate, have the right to claim asylum. Many of these rights that have been undone in the last few years through policy and through certain forms of enforcement practices of those enforcement. We recognize accompaniment as the act of organizing compas inside and outside of the detention center by listening, documenting, and visibilizing voices in struggle. Accompaniment to us means breaking down kind of structures of hierarchy, which other panelists will expand on. But essentially, we see ourselves working with folks who are detained, often letting them take the lead, letting them have a seat at the table, right, to tell us if the certain things that we're fighting for make sense or are in line with the things that they also envision. So what we're saying is that we're not coming into this space saying we know the way, we know the answers, but rather we're always here to learn and listen as well. And most of the time, right, listen because these folks are more impacted than we are. They will be the ones who feel the consequences of any actions that we take. Accompaniment also serves as an internal organizing principle of our collective. We organize across different struggles. We move alongside one another towards self-determination. I think that might be all. With that said, that was all of kind of a very basic history, the principles that guide us, right? Abolition and accompaniment, but I haven't told you like what we do, what it looks like in practice, right? But I'm honored to be here with the other members that will be speaking today who have been involved for many years directly in this work, who will share about their experiences and how they see these concepts that I'm talking about actually in practice. I'll hand it over to
Either, and I think before I want to go into how we actually structure and how we work, I want to pick up on Alexis was talking about and really what it means for us to find ourselves in this specific landscape, on this artificial border where we find many of the players in this space are not only continuing the legacy of the colonial project and continuing doing harm, but also in many other ways, if they are agents or organizations, are doing so in a predatory way, such as Civic or even Western Union, who takes $5 of every commissary fund that we share with Compass. They take a percentage. Or with Telmate, who's a company that runs all the phones for communication. So there are so many models that we see around us that are not only if they are actively in harm or perpetuating this system or this artificial space we're in, or if they are charity organizations who are ostensibly doing work to minimize the harm or alleviate suffering, are perhaps doing that in the aim of actually strengthening the system of harm itself by minimizing the externalities. So what I think is important is we find ourselves here in this work trying to be in support and accompaniment with Compass who are experiencing so much harm. Many of the players who do that in the nonprofit industrial complex actually perpetuate and strengthen the systems of harm that they are supposedly there to address. So finding ourselves in this space, we really think about, is there a different model of organizing? Is there a model of organizing that is based on mutualism, of actually communal support or mutual aid, that is not only addressing the symptoms of the system itself, but weakening it so it does not perpetuate itself? So we find ourselves asking, what is the ecosystem or what is the community space that can not only truly address the harm and the pain that is being caused by this space, but create something stronger than it? So what is a community space? What is a system of abolition or mutual aid that actually creates something stronger that destabilizes this overarching structure that we find ourselves in this particular place in San Diego and also in our globally around the world? So thinking about the DR structure, one of the most powerful components and its four tenets is this non-hierarchical structure. And what that means is many things. It's non-hierarchy in the way that we make decisions. We use a consensus-based process so that nobody is really calling the shots for what happens, how we organize. And that's important for many reasons. It means that we don't put people to do tasks, or we don't create projects that the people who actually carry them out didn't create them. So we make sure that we don't have any distinguishing or a trap where someone is working on a project or being in accompaniment, but actually didn't put that project or the scope of it or their own capacity at the forefront. So we make sure that we don't ever offer too much, and we are constantly checking in with ourselves. Or what capacity do we have? All of us have pretty full lives beyond the DR specific work, so we need to be in constant communication. What capacity do we have? So we're actually not representing a role that we can't follow through with, which is something that we see a lot happen in many of the charity organizations in San Diego, that they don't actually follow through with their offer. Yeah, and also being very adaptive and responsive to the moment. We have many committees that I'll talk about in a second. We have many components, but we want to make sure that we're shifting our focus and our attention to actually be in alignment with what is a request from a compa or what is something happening in the legal system that is changing. So we're consistent with it. And that's all kind of held within the non-hierarchical structure where every voice is accounted for. And we have a continuously evolving conversation about what is our focus, our mission, our capacity, and what does it mean to be not only trying to further this work, but again, as Alexis was saying, truly be an accompaniment. So really hearing and listening as we're walking to what is happening and what does it mean for us to occupy this space. And sometimes if one of our projects or one of our committees is doing something that doesn't seem to be in alignment with our overall goal, we can correct that and we can think about that together. So we use a committee structure, which means that we have specific avenues for our collective members to be doing work. And that helps us focus our work, but also see how we can represent and work on specific needs. One of those is the phone team. we run a hotline, which is the main form of communication between people in Otay Mesa Detention Center. And that's really useful for a lot of reasons, one of which is it's the main form of communication for a compa who is needing to share their story or wanting to share their story, having that be publicized, having that be shared, or also needing support, whether it be legal, we can legal or otherwise, we can make sure that they're finding what they need. And also to create community connection. Many folks who are in Otay Mesa for many years, having a sense that we are in community with them and we are in the accompaniment process with them is really important, I think, for as you can imagine, for the sense of kind of continuement. One of the other committees we have is commissary, and as I mentioned before, we're working in a system where the only way of supporting folks who are getting inadequate food and clothing in Otay Mesa to have extra food is going through Western Union. And this is something that we have to work with, which kind of shows that our process is not perfect, and we have to work within these systems that are predatory in many ways. So finding ourselves, how do we see ourselves in the middle of that is a part of ongoing conversation. Maybe Jess can speak more about medical advocacy, but also being in a process of advocating for compas and also being in political education for ourselves and our community, or many other collectives. We're working on an oral history project, specifically thinking about the testimonials during the beginning of COVID for many of the abuses that were happening during the beginning of the pandemic. Supporting compas who wanted their story to be shared. We're creating a platform for that so that we can all not forget this history. And that's many of the things I think that we do have a power and a role in, is trying to not forget what is happening right now. And that is kind of our power in creating community and being in the accompaniment, is to support many of the atrocities that are occurring not to be forgotten. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about post-release, which is what I'm mostly focused on. Core Civic, who runs Otay Mesa, drops people out of the back of a van in the night when they're released, oftentimes without warning so they can communicate with their families or their sponsors, and in the night, which is dangerous for many reasons. So one thing that's really important is to be in a process of communication before they're released, if possible, to make sure someone's there who has the ability to support with medical needs if needed, or a phone or clothing or ability of food. And we've created a housing network to support short-term hosting, which I've been doing for the last couple of years, and also rides to airports and communicating with the other people in this landscape so that whatever is occurring, we're there for it. And we support our collective struggle, our collective strategy, and our community organizing so that we're able to be adaptive to what is the need in the moment. You got a question?
Yes, can you please explain what the core civic business model is and what core civic is?
Definitely, yeah. I think Jess will speak about that in a second, but I'll just briefly say that they are the for-profit corporation that runs Otay Mesa Detention Center. But Jess will speak more about them. But I think in many ways, I think as I preface this, how do we not become a organization that minimizes the harm and the atrocities of what this company structurally does? And so that's a big part of what I see in post-release is how do we create a community through hosting, through conversation, through continued presence that creates a structure stronger than this model that actually can lead towards abolition. So I'll pass it off to Jess at that moment, and any questions about our structure, I'm happy to talk more afterwards. And if anyone's interested in thinking about any or participating in any of those programs or any of the work, I'd love to talk more.
Yeah, Jess, you can continue with covering whatever you'd like to about the actual facility that we've been referencing at OMDC.
Yeah, I'll share my screen and talk a little bit more about that. Okay, actually, I want to show not this. Yeah, so this is a map that shows the relationship between City College and the place that we've been talking about, which is Otay Mesa Detention Center. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you, but we can't see your map.
Oh, okay, bummer. Okay, I'll just stop then. So Otay Mesa Detention Center is about 25 miles southeast of the city of San Diego. So I know some folks live out in Otay Mesa, and you know it's really close to. Actually, I just took a bunch of students out there, and they said, "Oh, I didn't realize the detention center was there because it's a little bit off of the main street, but it's really close to R.J. Donovan State Prison, the county's juvenile detention center, the George Bailey jail, and the giant Amazon fulfillment warehouse." So it's that's where it is. It's operated by a private corporation called Core Civic, which the panelists have already mentioned. And they have contracts with actually two federal agencies. So one is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, and the other one is the U.S. Marshal Service. So that means that and this is actually a really unusual contract. I can talk more about it in a minute, but it means that there's a really wide variety. The fact that there's two contracts is unusual. There's a wide variety of people there. So there are people who are legally seeking asylum, and they might be in there waiting for a court hearing, waiting for a judge to give them a bond, or waiting for sponsorship. There are other people there who might be fighting deportation. There are other people there who are under U.S. Marshals custody, which means that they're facing criminal charges related to immigration. And as folks might know, since 9/11, there have been a lot of criminalization of immigration, and even before that. But so when we say criminal charges, that could just mean that someone has re-entered the US after previously being deported, and that might be their criminal charge. So there's a wide variety of reasons that people are there. These kinds of detention centers are a relatively new form of incarceration in the US. So it was invented in the 1980s, mostly to detain people coming from Haiti, Cuba, and Central America. And in 1994, there were only about 7,000 people being detained per day. But through some legislation that happened in 1996, and then after 9/11, it grew to about 50,000 people per day in the US by the 2010s. So by 2019, there's about 50,000 people per day. So it's just blown up. So Core Civic got most of these correction centers are run by private corporations rather than the federal government. So they're private corporations who have contracts with the government. Core Civic is one of the big ones. They used to be called Corrections Corporation of America, and they joined. They came here to San Diego in 1997. So they contracted first with the sheriff to open what was called San Diego Contract Facility. And that was open until 2010, and the sheriff declined to renew the lease. So then Core Civic actually bought their own piece of land where OMDC is now. And that opened in 2015. So I'm just giving you all this background because it's relevant to our struggle to eventually close Otay Mesa Detention Center. And the fact that OMDC owns that land makes it more complicated for us to try to shut it down. So I want to say, let's see, I think I said all. There has been widespread, ICE. So what we know about the contracts is, actually, let me start here. So there's been widespread community pushback against immigrant detention prisons. And in the state of California in 2019, our legislature passed AB 32, which was supposed to outlaw private prisons in the state. This was directly targeted at migrant detention facilities because, for folks who don't know, California has a huge prison guards union, and that means that we've had very few private prisons, state prisons in our history. And so this law was like mostly about immigrant detention. And in response, ICE and CoreCivic signed a new contract at the very end of 2019, right before that law was supposed to go into effect. And it was a 5-year contract with 2 5-year extensions, so it could be in place for 15 years. And what we know of that contract is that it ensures that the federal government will pay CoreCivic for a minimum of 600 quote unquote beds, whether those are filled with people or not, for those 15 years. And they pay $154.24 for each of those beds. And then they pay a little bit less for anything more than 600 people. So that means that ACLU has estimated that ICE paid CoreCivic $54 million in 2019 just for Otay Mesa Detention Center. We don't actually know a lot about the contract between CoreCivic and U.S. Marshals, but it just means that there are additional monies being paid to CoreCivic to house U.S. Marshals custody people there. We're trying to work on getting more information about that. And that's really unusual. There's not very many facilities in the U.S. that house both ICE and U.S. Marshals Service. So it's also a barrier to us trying to shut OMDC down, but it makes our abolitionist politics very important because we want to support everyone who's there at OMDC, whether they are, and we don't like ask questions and we don't like judge why they're there. So they could be there for asylum seeking reasons. They could be there because they're quote unquote facing federal charges, and we don't distinguish. Like, we want everyone to get out. So I'll just briefly say some of the main concerns that people have shared with us about OMDC are about the use of solitary confinement there as a form of retaliation, a way of dealing with mental health crises. So people that are going through mental health crises get put in the solitary confinement units. And also it's been used as a form of quarantine during COVID. So, just imagine living in a space the size of your bathroom and not having contact with other people, and how that would affect your mental and physical health. There's also been a lot of reports about medical neglect. So what we have heard is that to save money, OMDC hires medical staff with really minimal qualifications. And so those people can do really nothing more than prescribe ibuprofen for a lot of different complicated medical conditions. And so a lot of time people feel not believed about being in pain or having really serious symptoms. Their vision is disrupted. They have difficulty getting access to things like glasses or prosthetics, getting appointments with specialists. And there have also been people for whom this medical neglect has led to death in OMDC during the pandemic, but also before the pandemic. We also hear reports about labor exploitation. So people get paid $1. I'm sorry, I think it's $1 per hour, but folks can correct me. It's way below minimum wage. And to do the cleaning and the food preparation at the facility. This is necessary to keep the facility open. And people really need that money because the food is terrible there and they don't have access to all the hygiene supplies and things that they need. And so, people need that money but it's super exploitative. Of sexual assault at the facility by staff. And then, of course, the reason that I got involved in detention resistance is because of COVID and the total neglect that was happening during the beginning of the pandemic. So people were reporting that they didn't have adequate cleaning supplies, they didn't have access to masks and gloves. They wanted masks and gloves. They were being asked to sign a release form, releasing CoreCivic from liability. When people refused to sign that, they were pepper sprayed and removed from the pod. There was really limited access to testing, even people with very severe symptoms, inadequate quarantining. And then there was during the pandemic, there was all kinds of movement, both from people obviously outside the facility coming to work, but they were still transferring people around. And so this was all very scary. And sadly, the first person to die in ICE custody due to COVID-19 was here in San Diego on May 6th, 2020, Carlos Ernesto Escobar Mejia. So presente Carlos. So this is the kinds of things that we hear from people and why we're so committed to getting people out and to support them while they're there. And I just want to end by noting that there are so many stories of people's courage and bravery in face of killer detention. So some examples are when the pandemic first started, there was someone who banged on their door for 2 hours until the staff arrived to someone who was having trouble breathing and couldn't stand. So there was a lot of examples of that, of people who tried to advocate for their compas who were sick, and people still do that. There's many examples of people in civil disobedience who've engaged in hunger strikes, using what tools they have, which is their bodies, to protest these kinds of conditions. There's people who've testified in class action lawsuits, who've tried to use the official grievance procedures and report what's happening to them. And there's also been people who now are engaged in a labor strike, not at OMDC, but at a Golden State Annex and Mesa Verde, to try to use their labor power to challenge their conditions at confinement. So we work in accompaniment with all of these people who are advocating for their lives and for their dignity and their freedom.
Thank you, Jess. I think there was a question in the audience while you were speaking.
Yeah. Why is the food so bad? Do they have a store where they sell you food?
The audience member said, why is the food so bad? Is there a store where they sell you food?
Yeah, so food in institutions is notoriously bad, but private corporations are making profit by people being there. So there's an incentive to cut corners and to, offer the cheapest meals for people, which are, the things that would be cheap to us in our community, which are things that are really bad for people. They're very high in sugar, they're high in fat and cholesterol, they're high in salt. People don't have access to a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, which are more expensive. So a lot of people have reported that really exacerbates their health conditions and makes them very sick. So in the pandemic, it was really bad. They didn't have enough staff to prepare food. So people reported that they were given bologna sandwiches every day for weeks on end. So it was even worse then.
Thank you, Jess. Yeah, and they were still frozen and oftentimes rotten. Someone actually snuck one out to show us because they wanted the media to know what they were feeding them 3 times a day in the centers. We're gonna have some additional comments from Emmet briefly, and then we're gonna hand it to Antem to wrap up, and then we'll open it up for Q&A or additional dialogue.
I just want to add on to what Jess already mentioned that so in San Diego County this year so far, there's been more than 70,000 people who met Customs and Border Protection. There is a direct incentive by CoreCivic to take them into detention for their own profit, and that's further coming out of federal money. So there's a process I think that's underpinning this system where the more beds that they can fill, the more money they make. And I think as we're thinking about people who are actually seeking their self-determined freedom or safety, this is the direct system they're meeting, is that there is a militarized border protection who are directly feeding people into this private corporation who is not a federal facility. You're not actually kind of have to follow through with federal human rights standards because they're no longer in federal custody. And I think just to see the nature of this, as just talking about what's going on in Otay Mesa, the overarching story is that there is this direct relationship to criminalize people for the sake of profit.
Hi y'all. And I guess lastly, just to also kind of make it a little more real. For y'all, all of y'all that went to like public school, you know those lists were not good. It was very inedible. So like we're talking about people who are in the custody of the government and who are by like legally considered non-citizens, and that comes with a lot of like cultural connotations, a lot of and legal repercussions. So that's why that's a very important thing, and you know that's why we do that commissary support. Because you know it helps to at least supplement. You know, if you at least have like a bag of chips, like that's better than eating rotten food. You know, that at least that's in a bag, no one touched it or mishandled it. But yeah, so in transitioning from what Jess was talking about, how we were working in accompaniment with folks inside, and they let us know the conditions inside. It's not just. I think the situation doesn't always just end there. And a lot of the reason why we also have that guidance that we work and we let folks take the lead more is because they are the ones who are going to face the repercussions of speaking out. And you know, I remember like I'll get to the folks who have spoken out, but just in doing post-release work and talking to compas, and compas being the word we use to refer to people inside because they're our friends and it helps humanize them. In speaking to our compas who have been inside, you know, the detention center is really a place where people's like spirit is like tested because there's, as we said, solitary confinement. I think in the center they call it el hoyo, the hole, when you get sent to solitary. And so yeah, so like I mean the guards themselves aren't the nicest people either. I've heard a lot of compas talk about how they were very dismissive of their concerns. I think if I remember a quote correctly, is like you deserve to be here, like you thought you were just going to come to this country and have a good time. No, you're not. But yeah, so now I'm going into like why we let folks take the lead in organizing is because when we know that when people have spoken out, you know, there are repercussions to them speaking out and letting us know. When we've had events, whenever we've had any kind of protest or direct action at the detention center, the folks who call in to talk from within the center are the ones who, you know, are gonna like not have the best time afterwards, you know, being thrown to solitary or missing a meal. Those are the kinds of things that happen. And so that's why it's really important for us to just not make case studies out of the people who choose to communicate with us, you know, and as Emmet had talked about a little bit about our critique about, you know, the nonprofit or hierarchy structure, is that, you know, we're not really focused on just having, you know, getting in communication with someone inside, making a case study out of them, you know, doing the getting the story and, satisfying grant maker and then rinse and repeat. That's not really what we're interested in doing, and that's why, like, I don't know if it's been mentioned before, but we don't have staff. We're all volunteers, and we share in making all these decisions. And so in going into that similar theme of sharing the work and using like a consensus model to organize, Alexis was able to read to you our current mission statement, and in picking a little bit more in there, in particular, like it says we work in accompaniment with those most impacted to abolish carceral logics, and then following on in that we're seeking to cultivate alternative ways of relating to one another. But how do we even like get to the point of articulating our mission in that way? And that is through doing pláticas, which is these little workshops / sessions that we have been doing to inform our guiding politics. And in these pláticas, we've gone together at Centro Cultural. It was the first time actually, I think that I've seen y'all because I got involved during the pandemic, and it was during the Zoom. And actually, we saw that Zoom is a good tool, but it was hard to continue to organize it that way because it's just after a whole year of just not seeing people. There's communications breakdowns, there's stuff like that happening. So we were able to have these pláticas at the Centro Cultural de la Raza, and we were able to workshop out, what is our mission? We focused on immigrant detention centers, but, this is an immigrant detention center fight. It's not just focused on the detention center. It's also about the jails that other folks find themselves in, and also recognizing, and I would like to credit the phone team, the hotline team, for like a lot of the information that we've gotten. They have been in communication with compas who are, coming here seeking refuge, but also people in the marshal's custody who are in federal custody, and they aren't, they have documents. So understanding that in targeting OMDC, we are fighting not just for people in detention, but people in federal custody, and tying those fights together to form a larger effort against the prison industrial complex. And then following up just in pláticas, we're still working on our statement and our understanding of abolition and accompaniment. We left off also on a pending conversation on racial capitalism, and also just really centering down like how we're going to, how do we justify our work in raising funds for commissary when we understand that this money is going to profit like a company that sells these things to be sold there. Yeah. And so in moving now next to the next part of like about our larger organizing is how we organize with other organizations in San Diego. So Detention Resistance has been able to work in coalition in the Freedom All Coalition. And that has been like a pretty valuable space for us to be in contact with other folks, because I think before we were only basically talking with orgs that help us in our communications side, like Freedom for Immigrants, in the post-release committee, when we find ourselves waiting out there for folks, at the trolley station, it's, with a local church that does this kind of work and is there in person, and Miles for Migrants, in helping us, find these resources for compas that we ourselves can't fund, but, within these networks of community support, we're able to bring a lot. So in the Freedom All Coalition, I think we've been a lot more hands-on since the beginning and in more recent years. I know I was able to participate in the pilgrimage for a better future that was led by a large statewide coalition of organizations that were targeting every single detention center in California. And that was a very amazing experience because you kind of got used to being in San Diego and just focusing on OMDC, but then meeting these folks all the way up in San Francisco, and hearing the stories of how they were able to shut down their respective detention centers. It brings a lot of strength and really kind of makes it all the more possible to make this change. And through the Freedom All Coalition, we now have been working with the Dignity Not Detention Coalition, which is pretty heavily organized by the Detention Watch Network. And they've been able to give us resources and training. And currently, right now, we're strategizing in the Freedom All Coalition to really put like a plan to do something before like the contract between ICE and CoreCivic is renewed in 2024, if I remember correctly. and now seeing how we're gonna organize after AB 32 was pretty much struck down by a federal court. And I think for me, that's all I had for now.
Thank you, Angel. So just to wrap up, as the panelists have been talking about the ways that our work encompasses direct aid, right? It is a sort of humanitarianism that we talk about a lot, right? About the work that we do in terms of the letter and pen pal program, the commissary money that we send for folks, and the post-release work we do in hosting folks and getting them to their final destinations. We also do visibilizing the struggles inside by connecting folks to the media with the archival projects of the testimonies to humanize these experiences, but also to expose the human rights abuses that are rampant in these facilities. But we also engage in political struggle within, right, supporting hunger strikes and other forms of mobilization led by folks inside, as well as outside of the detention center, rallies, marches, and in coalition, and national and transnational campaigns that are all working to shut down their respective detention centers, as Anthony was speaking about. So I think we have about 10 to 15 minutes left, and I wanted to make space for Q&A or dialogue, comments, anything, so that we can get more participation from the audience. So I welcome any comments or questions that may have come up for you throughout the presentation.
Hi, good morning, y'all. Good afternoon. My name is Martinez, and it's been really interesting to hear about the work that your organization does. I'm from LA, so it's interesting to hear and being closer to the border. Right now, I'm actually in a program around counseling, and so I know that I was hearing you mentioned how mental health is also, really important, especially with like solitary confinement and all the trauma that these compas are going through in the detention center. So I'm wondering, what does the work look like in terms of like the post-release and regards to like mental health, and like what organizations are you guys in contact with? Do you have clinicians? Because not only through the trauma that they are facing in the centers, but even coming back out, and then also like how their stories are being used as a way to activism, but that like activism being their reality. So yeah, I'm kind of more about that. I don't know if that makes what I'm hearing.
Thank you for your comment. Yes, mental health is actually one of the big kind of themes that come up, and I know Jess brought that up, a lot about that as well. In terms of the work we've done, I'll allow space for everyone else to answer as well. We have been in contact with a therapist that had been practicing for 10 to 20 years in LA, actually, who would come down to offer us therapy and self-care, because there's also a lot of secondary trauma and burnout that happens, right? So we were doing a lot of that work, and they were really great in donating their time and wanting to work with us. We've had a lot of interest from other folks who are also therapists, practicing, etc. It's been difficult because people who are licensed, for example, cannot provide those services to folks inside without there being a liability. So we've actually struggled. If you're interested in connecting with us, we have a network of therapists who are interested in working with us or developing some way to provide that. But we have also dealt with mental health crises with folks, you can imagine, have a lot of trauma getting to the border, have more inflicted on them within those facilities, and don't come out so well. And so we don't want to criminalize these people, right? We want to actually respond to or be supportive, but it's a very real issue. And we've had crises where we could have really used a therapist or some advice, right, about how to handle certain kind of situations. So it is an ongoing thing that I think is a really worthy thing that I think we should invest in thinking about and building a network. But yeah, it's great to always get more people who are interested in being on call and working with meeting with us, or in any way kind of working on that issue. You all have any comments, or maybe Jeff?
I guess towards the end of this year's medical advocacy committee, it did come up like mental health. Was it your friend?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is something that we should be looking to, like, in the next session of medical advocacy, because that is gonna be really important. We're ourselves not professionals. That's the,
Yeah, I just wanted to share kind of some experiences with dozens of folks who their first experience with this country is being treated so inhumanely that I mean, I don't need to share any stories, but I think it's you can imagine that someone's actually seeking safety and seeking a space where they can find asylum or their self-determined future. And what they're met with is being told that they're less than human and are not worthy of food. So what we have found, and I've been living alongside him with compas for the last couple of years, is just really thinking with them of what it means to change this narrative. And obviously not as someone trained at all. It's a very imperfect process, but I think this is again what it really means to be an accompaniment, is realizing that the wounds that many people are experiencing are actually felt and should be really seen in our wider community. And the fact that we're not actually engaging with them is part of this sickness of capitalism, is that we are not able to actually feel the pain that we are perpetuating ourselves, being on the side of the border. So that's not an answer to your question necessarily, but just I think from experience, what's been so true is just the opportunity for us to really actually show that there is community and there is a space where someone's trauma is welcome, because it's actually part of a larger world we're in, and it's not theirs to hold alone. So just so many nights of being the first contact and saying welcome to the United States in a different way that they've had for years or months, and that's again part of the flexibility of in post releases. Sometimes that means getting Popeyes, or that means just being able to sit for hours or days and not do anything. And sometimes we're in a place where we can go to a ER right away. So just to share, I think that's a bit of how we try to hold it in post release, but definitely could use a lot more support with mental health.
Thank you. Is there another? There's a couple of back.
Move this to the back. And
Yo voy a necesitar traducción. Primero, pues quiero mostrar mi respeto y admiración por el gran trabajo que hacen. Estoy muy sorprendida. Tengo como un dolor en mi pecho, se me hace algo impactante. Quería preguntar qué pasa con los niños y entiendo que son 3 situaciones por las que puede estar una persona dentro de los centros. ¿Cuál es entonces la salida? ¿Cómo es que obtienen su salida? ¿Y qué pasa con ellos? Entiendo que unos es por situación migratoria, entonces hasta que la regularizan pueden salir, ya sea para estar en Estados Unidos o ir deportados a sus países. Y de los otros 2, entiendo que uno es por comisión de algún delito. Y el otro, pues, no entendí muy bien lo de asilo, si se resuelve o no. Me gustaría más información sobre eso.
So very quickly, to translate, I wanted to express my gratitude and just emotion and feeling of such the great work that y'all are doing, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about what happens to the children. And I have a question about what happens cuando salen de este lugar. Sí. What happens when they're released, and also the question of asylum.
Sí.
Muchas gracias por sus comentarios. Vamos a tratar de responder como desde lo que nosotros entendemos de este proceso. Jess, I was wondering if you actually wanted to respond to this first. If you understand.
Can you repeat the question? I couldn't quite hear it.
Was what happens to the children? And then the question is, I understand that there's 3 situations in which people are detained in the detention center. One is for the criminal charges, and that's why they're not being released. Another is that they're waiting for their asylum case to be decided upon and whether or not they'll be released in the country or deported. And if there is another, like, what are the situations in which people find themselves kind of stuck in the detention center? So if you want to talk a little, they just want a little more information about that. We'll have to translate afterwards, or how would you like to do this? Yeah. Okay, you want to, or? I can try, but I don't know, I don't think so. Okay, go ahead.
Sure. So there are no children at Otay Mesa Detention Center. It's all adults over the age of 18.
You want to translate that? You can translate now. So, no hay niños pequeños en esta centro de detención, son todos del año 18 para arriba.
There are other detention centers where families are detained together and where they hold unaccompanied minors, but we don't have one in San Diego.
So hay otros centros de detención donde mantienen la familia en esta detención, y, pero aquí en este centro no hay niños.
So when I was talking about the 2 types of contracts, one is with Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
So I was talking, especialmente estaba hablando de 2 tipos de contratos, y uno de esos contratos es con el Instituto de Inmigración.
So people in ICE custody are either people who are seeking asylum or people who are being deported, fighting deportation charges.
Y cuando están en esta custodia, quieren asilo, o también están luchando contra esta deportación adentro.
So it could be people who have just presented themselves at the border and they have been put in detention until they can go in front of a judge and request asylum.
Cuando algunas de estas personas ya que se entregaron en la frontera, entonces están en el centro de detención hasta que tienen la oportunidad de presentarse al juez para solicitar asilo.
Or it could be people who have lived in the US for a very long time who were picked up. For example, Carlos Escobar Mejia was driving with a friend and they were pulled over and they saw that he was undocumented and they took him there to deport him for years, 30 years.
We're actually translating on the side, so we can keep going if you'd like.
Okay, great. And so finally, the other contract for the US Marshal Service is for people who are facing immigration-related criminal charges. And so that could be a wide variety of things. Like I said, it could be people who have been deported once and then they re-entered illegally into the US. So then that becomes not just a matter of deporting them again, but they also have to face criminal charges in court. But there are a lot of other kinds of criminal charges that people might face. Of course, the government likes to highlight people who are facing like federal drug charges or, smuggling charges or those kinds of things. But it's really a wide range of things that people might be having to go to court for. Does that answer the question?
I will be up.
Not having to post bond and sponsorship.
Yeah, and I think also speak for many people who cross the border and are apprehended and thus go into detention centers and they are facing deportation. There is a process for seeking asylum within detention or applying for asylum. And many people who can be released, who are then supposedly in this deportation process, which can last for years. And this is something we haven't touched upon, but because of how this legal process works with judges, people are just waiting for their case to be processed for multiple years, sometimes. And there is a legal process for them to be released from detention while this is going on, in a very similar process to a criminal who's released on parole. But then many of the things that are keeping people in detention are not getting bond, not getting finances to be released on bond, and sometimes the bond can be tens of thousands of dollars, and it's arbitrarily set. And this is something that, again, in the organizing community, how do we participate in a system where, in order to get someone released from detention, there needs to be shown bond. And one thing that we face a lot also, or is very common, is people do not have a place to go. There needs to be a fiscal and host sponsor who is a U.S. citizen to be recipient and some sort of perverse guardian for an asylum seeker in order for them to be released from detention in the asylum process, in this rule process. So one thing we see a lot is people are staying in detention for a very long time. Some cases, if there's not a translator for their language, then they can be there for 6 months before ICE find the translator for their language. So nothing is happening. So they're staying in detention in these conditions. They're being made money off of, and it's a waiting process. So another big work that we're associated with, but not doing our directly, is working with folks who can post bond and also be sponsors, which is critical in this, again, very perverse system.
Thank you, Emmet. I think I don't know how we're doing on time. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. One more question. I didn't know what ended.
We have time maybe for one more question. No pregunta?
Oh, okay. When you explain to later that these movements and how that there is of it, is it somewhere different than how you're facing these rights from the people that might have Just, I'm wondering if you're gonna want to talk about this, because I know you might have more knowledge on it, but I just wanted to make the correction that it is $1 per day. And I know that there is some labor lawsuits that OMDC that are current, but the question is about what type of labor are they actually doing for that?
Do you want me to answer that?
If you'd like to.
Sure, I can try. Other folks may know more, but I do know that people reported being put to work cleaning the facility, especially during the pandemic. So, cleaning the pods where people are at and the common areas, and that people are also employed in the kitchen, making food and serving food to people. And I don't know if other folks have things to add.
Yeah, I'll admit that I don't particularly know the details, but I know that folks at the Inland Coalition for Immigrant Justice were have been covering a lot of the labor strikes going on at Mesa Detention Center. And so, yeah, so from what I remember, it was, that kind of staff were, maintaining spaces clean, as Jeff said, like serving food, why pay, federally or state mandated, minimum wage when you can pay someone $1 a day to do these things. But in prisons, there is actually jobs that private companies themselves profit from. I'm not sure if it's the case in the detention center. I wouldn't be surprised. Because again, less protections than immigrant detention center. But yeah, a lot of these things, just make more money when you can pay someone so little. And I do also remember another comment on compas who, they weren't even getting paid, they weren't even working. They were kind of just themselves having to clean because there was no one else cleaning at the height of COVID. So yeah, that's another point.
But I think also to your question, CoreCivic is a private corporation, also just run prisons. And in other situations, there's a lot of manufacturing going on, and that's not as much the case for asylum seekers because of some other federal protections specifically for that. But I think just to continue on, more learning that should be done for anyone interested on CoreCivic themselves, because they made $1.9 billion in revenue last year. A lot of which came from federal government, just in many different prisons. So, but I think maybe to your question, in some conversations about for-profit prisons who are producing goods off of prison labor is not as much applicable to migrants.
Yeah, go ahead. Who would you like to?
So this would actually be the last question.
Okay. Thank you guys for your hard work. So I have two questions. My first one is, how do you guys get funding to do the work that I'm doing? Do you have connection to lawyers that can help immigrant people in the prison?
In terms of funding, we're fully funded by donations. Sometimes these are larger from certain foundations or nonprofits that allow them to give us that money. We do presentations and I get honorariums, we fund it. We just have our Venmo and PayPal open all the time for donations. We have regular donations, right, from people in San Diego who support our work and just send us every month, here or there. They hear that we don't have any more money, they send us 1,000, 5,000. So it's all donations. The other question, do we have contact with lawyers that can, we do not do legal work, we do not offer that as an actual organization. We do consult and have a lot of lawyers on our, in our network that we work with. But we do not, that's one of the things we didn't talk about, but we do not do any legal work because yeah, I don't know if you want to elaborate, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yes, I think one thing that's actually really sensitive component in general in working in these cases is not crossing line into giving counsel, which could be held against others and ourselves. But one thing that we do definitely do is try to pass on information and resources to legal firms, and also some of the really important things to know about the system that generally folks who are just entering it in detention do not know about. So finding support systems and whatnot.
Yeah, I would say we try to generate know your rights information and education that we know is legit. And then we do when there's certain individuals who take it upon themselves to connect people. So if someone called us to have no legal representation and needed it, they would try to connect them to pro bono lawyers or other organizations who focus specifically on legal. But we, like Emmet said, we have to make sure we have a line where we're not giving legal advice because we're not lawyers.
Thank you, everybody. It looks like we've reached our time, but I really wanted to give a round of applause to our panelists. Very generous. Thank you to Detention Resistance, Alexis, Emmet, and Jess who are here and presented upon their work. And I hope that this continues the dialogue and moves us towards action and supporting our community and supporting organizations like Detention Resistance. So thank you for being here. We have also Thursday, today and Friday, we have additional panels. So please look at our schedule for the Binational Conference. And we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you to the translators as well. And thank you to the organizers of the panel. So gracias. Everybody.
And also we are going to have the next panel. This is starting here in 10 minutes. It's going to be about the effort of the community, making people of the California. So we would like it. We finally going to start here in a few weeks.
For the I was